She was just a janitor. Or so everyone thought. But when a millionaire director mocked her in front of an entire film crew, he had no idea she was about to school him. In 3 different languages. What happened next stunned the whole room. And the internet. You? A janitor? Trying to read that? Please. If you're so smart, translate it. The entire factory floor went silent. Machines whirred softly in the background, but every person on shift had stopped what they were doing. The arrogant voice of Mr. Dalton echoed off the high industrial walls like a gunshot. His words weren't just loud. They cut through the air with razor-sharp smugness. He stood tall in his tailored designer suit, arms crossed, a smug grin plastered across his face. His polished shoes clicked against the concrete as he took a step forward, staring down at the young woman in front of him. Maya. She was in her early 20s, dressed in a simple gray maid's uniform, white apron tied neatly around her waist, sleeves rolled up slightly from a long day of work. In one hand she held a well-used mop, its handle leaning slightly as if it, too, had paused to witness what was about to unfold. In her other hand was a sheet of paper, crisp white and covered in small printed text. French. Maya had picked it up moments earlier, finding it near the director's station. It had slipped out of a binder one of the assistants had dropped. She'd been curious enough to glance over the words. She loved language. Even in the midst of long shifts and aching feet, words gave her a sense of joy that no paycheck ever could. What she didn't expect was to be watched while she read it. And she definitely didn't expect to be mocked. Dalton tilted his head, sizing her up like she was part of the scenery, something beneath his notice until now. The smirk on his face said it all. He thought this was a joke. To him, a janitor reading French was like a dog walking on its hind legs. Amusing maybe, but never to be taken seriously. Maya didn't flinch. She didn't react the way some might have. There was no shouting, no anger, no dramatic outburst. Instead, she looked at him steadily, her posture calm but firm. The factory had seen its share of drama, but this was different. Everyone sensed it. From the security guard by the door to the makeup artist sitting on a stool. All eyes were on Maya and the man trying to humiliate her. "You want me to translate it?" she asked, her voice soft but clear. Dalton shrugged mockingly. "Why not? Show us what you've got." There was a chuckle from one of the camera crew. A few people looked uncomfortable, others curious. No one expected much. Maya unfolded the paper slowly, as if weighing her next move. Then, in a smooth and composed tone, she began to translate. Word by word. Line by line. French to English. She didn't stumble. She didn't hesitate. Her voice echoed with precision, and the meanings came to life. Not just robotic translations but thoughtful interpretations. She spoke like someone who understood what she was reading. Like someone who belonged on the other side of the camera, not just behind a mop. As the sentences flowed, the atmosphere in the room began to shift. The smirk on Dalton's face began to fade. His arms uncrossed. His lips parted slightly, unsure whether to interrupt or remain silent. He hadn't expected this. No one had. When she reached the end, Maya paused. She looked up. "Would you like it in Spanish too?" she asked, her voice still calm, but now with a subtle edge, confidence earned and undeniable. Without waiting for a reply, she began again, this time in flawless Spanish. She translated the same text a second time, even more fluidly, the rhythm of her voice growing stronger. One of the crew members whispered, "Wow," under his breath. Others exchanged looks of disbelief. Then, as if she were just warming up, Maya offered one more surprise. Swahili. A language her grandmother taught her as a child, one she cherished deeply. Her voice took on a different cadence, smooth and rich, dancing through each word with pride and grace. By the time she finished, the factory floor was completely still. No one laughed now. Dalton stood motionless. His face had turned a shade paler. The weight of what just happened pressing down on him like a spotlight turned the wrong way. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't the center of attention, and he didn't like it. I didn't know," he muttered. "I didn't mean." Maya raised a hand gently, stopping him. "It's fine," she said. "You didn't ask." She handed the paper back to him and picked up her mop. But just before walking away she added, "Next time try respect first. It'll save you some embarrassment." A ripple of quiet applause broke out among the crew, not the kind meant for show, but the kind people give when truth cuts through arrogance like a knife. Even the assistant director, who had been quiet through it all, gave a small nod. Dalton didn't say anything else. He looked down at the paper, then back at Maya, watching her return to work. But she wasn't just a janitor anymore. Not in anyone's eyes. In the days that followed, word of the moment spread beyond the set. One of the sound guys posted about it on social media. It went viral, captioned with, "The smartest person on set isn't always the one wearing a suit." People were inspired by Maya, moved by her quiet confidence and grace. And then something unexpected happened. A week later, a producer from the set reached out to Maya with a job offer. Not as a janitor, but as a language consultant for an upcoming international film. She smiled when she read the message, because in the end, Maya didn't need to prove anything. But when the moment came, she did what many only dream of. She let her brilliance speak for itself, and she walked away with her head held high, while the man who tried to shame her was left holding a mop-sized lesson in humility. Maya wasn't just a janitor. To the average eye, that's all she was. Pushing a mop across the concrete floors of a noisy factory, blending into the background while everyone else went about their more important work. Her gray uniform and white apron marked her as invisible to most, a part of the scenery rather than someone worth noticing. But Maya was far from ordinary. She was a brilliant young woman with a quiet strength and a sharp mind. While others were out partying or scrolling endlessly through their phones, Maya had been studying. She held a degree in linguistics, a subject she had fallen in love with at a young age, when she realized language had the power to open doors, connect cultures, and bridge impossible divides. She had worked tirelessly for that degree, often juggling 2 jobs just to pay tuition, rent, and to support her 2 younger siblings after their parents passed away. It wasn't easy, but she did it. And now, even though her days were spent scrubbing floors and emptying trash bins, her mind was still as sharp as ever. Fluent in English, French, Spanish, and Swahili, Maya had a world of knowledge inside her. But in the factory, nobody cared about her degrees. Nobody asked about her talents. To most of them, she was just the cleaning lady. That morning had started like any other. The factory was buzzing with energy. A big film production was using the facility as a backdrop for an upcoming movie, and the crew was everywhere. Cameras, wires, actors rehearsing their lines. Among the group was Mr. Charles Dalton, the high-profile director known for his luxury suits, expensive tastes, and ego that could fill the entire building. He walked with his chin high, sunglasses indoors, and a constant air of self-importance. Maya had seen men like him before. Loud, arrogant, always assuming their success meant they were better than everyone else. So when she saw him strutting around with a clipboard and barking orders, she kept her head down and continued working. But then something interesting happened. As she swept near the director's station, she noticed a piece of paper lying on the floor. It must have slipped out of someone's folder or binder. Curious, she picked it up. The paper was filled with dense, printed text in French. To anyone else, it would have looked like random squiggles or confusing foreign jargon. But to Maya, it was a welcome challenge. Her eyes scanned the words, her brain automatically decoding the grammar, the flow, the meaning. She smiled a little without realizing it. It had been a while since she'd read anything academic or formal in another language. It was refreshing. But just as she was getting into it, a voice interrupted her thoughts. "Excuse me," came the sharp, amused tone. She looked up. It was him, Dalton. He narrowed his eyes, looking her up and down with thinly veiled disdain. His gaze dropped to the paper in her hand, then flicked back to her face. "You? A janitor?" he scoffed, loud enough for the crew around them to hear. "Trying to read that?" Maya blinked, unsure what to say. Dalton stepped closer, tilting his head as if she were a puzzle he couldn't quite understand. But the twist was, he didn't really want to understand. He had already made up his mind. He chuckled under his breath and said, "Please, if you're so smart, translate it." That was it. That one sentence. And suddenly the entire room seemed to freeze. Some of the crew members nearby exchanged awkward glances. A boom mic operator shifted uncomfortably. A makeup artist bit her lip. No one quite knew how to respond. Some chuckled along nervously with Dalton, unsure if it was a joke or a test. Others simply looked down at their shoes. Maya didn't laugh. She didn't look away either. She held the paper calmly, her posture unchanged. She had faced this kind of condescension before. People assuming she wasn't intelligent just because she wore a uniform. People thinking her place was only on the sidelines of life, not the center of it. Dalton, meanwhile, stood like a proud rooster, fully expecting her to mumble something, apologize, or crumble under pressure. But Maya had something else in mind. For a brief moment, she glanced down at the paper again. Not because she needed to, but to collect herself. She had a choice. Walk away and let him think he was right. Or remind everyone in that room, and Dalton himself, why you should never judge someone by their job title or clothing. She took a deep breath. Then, in a voice smooth and steady, she began to translate. At first it was just the French to English. But the way she spoke, it wasn't mechanical. It wasn't memorized. It was meaningful. She brought the words to life with tone, inflection, and confidence that came from years of study and understanding. Her voice echoed through the factory, and slowly, the expressions on everyone's faces began to change. Dalton's grin disappeared. She didn't stop there. After the French, she translated it again, this time in flawless Spanish. Her pronunciation was crisp, her rhythm fluid. Heads turned. The crew who had quietly doubted her were now visibly impressed. And then, almost like a final note in a perfectly played symphony, she added the Swahili version, a language rooted in her family's history. She spoke it with pride, honoring her roots while dismantling every stereotype Dalton had tried to pin on her. When she finished, the room remained quiet. Not with tension anymore, but with awe. Dalton stood frozen, his mouth slightly open. He had nothing to say. Because Maya? She had already said everything that mattered, without ever raising her voice. Maya didn't get angry. She didn't shout. She didn't storm off like Dalton probably expected. Instead, she simply took a slow breath, straightened her back, and unfolded the paper with the kind of calm that made people nervous. Her fingers were steady, her expression unreadable. The silence in the room grew heavier as the crew looked on, uncertain whether they were about to witness something uncomfortable or unforgettable. Dalton still wore a half-smirk, but it was beginning to falter. He leaned back a little, as if trying to look uninterested, but his eyes stayed fixed on her. This wasn't going how he thought it would. And then Maya spoke. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't try to impress. She just began to read. Word by word, line by line. She translated the text from French into English with the poise of a seasoned linguist. Her voice carried across the room. Not loud but clear. Each sentence she spoke unfolded with precision. Her pronunciation perfect. Her tone deliberate. It wasn't just a literal translation. It was thoughtful and flowing, as though she understood not just the words but the meaning behind them. The crew, which had been distracted just moments before, was now silent, fully focused on her. Someone at the lighting rig tilted their head to listen more closely. A young assistant slowly put down the coffee she was holding. Even the actor who had been pacing back and forth with his script stopped mid-step, his brow furrowed with interest. Dalton's expression began to shift. The smug confidence that had been so prominent a minute ago was now giving way to something else. Confusion, followed quickly by disbelief. He blinked as if trying to figure out whether she was reading from memory, or maybe just lucky. But she wasn't lucky. She was brilliant. And Maya wasn't finished. Without breaking her flow, she lifted her eyes briefly and began the same passage again, this time in flawless Spanish. The transition was seamless. Her voice took on a slightly different rhythm, her accent crisp and unmistakably authentic. There was no hesitation, no fumbling. She moved through the paragraph as if she'd been speaking Spanish her entire life. Now the silence wasn't just from surprise, it was from awe. One of the camera operators let out a quiet wow under his breath. A production assistant glanced at Dalton, then back at Maya, almost in disbelief. The director's assistant, who had been taking notes on a tablet, stopped typing altogether. Dalton's smirk was completely gone now. His mouth was slightly open, the color draining from his face. He glanced around, clearly aware that all eyes were no longer on him. His carefully crafted image, polished, powerful, superior, was crumbling in real time, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. But Maya still wasn't done. She took one final breath and began again, this time in Swahili. The sound of the language rolled off her tongue like poetry, soft but strong. Swahili carried the rhythm of her heritage, the strength of her upbringing, and the pride of generations before her. It was clear she wasn't performing. She was simply being. And in doing so, she held the room in the palm of her hand. No one moved. Even the sound tech, who had been fiddling with his controls moments earlier, froze in place. The headset around his neck slipped slightly down his shoulder, but he didn't bother adjusting it. He was too busy listening. Too busy watching this woman, this janitor, as Dalton had so dismissively called her, redefine everyone's assumptions with every word she spoke. When Maya finished, she quietly folded the paper and handed it back to Dalton. That's when the silence broke. A ripple of applause began at the back of the room. It wasn't loud or forced, it was genuine. A few claps, then a few more, until nearly everyone on the set was applauding her. Not for putting on a show, but for standing her ground with grace and power. She hadn't humiliated Dalton with insults or attitude. She had done it by simply being excellent, unapologetically excellent. Dalton's face turned red. Not just from embarrassment, but from the realization that he had been completely wrong. He had misjudged her based on her uniform, her job, her silence. He had assumed she was beneath him, and now he stood exposed. Just a man in a suit who had mistaken privilege for intelligence. He looked like he wanted to disappear. He tried to speak. Opened his mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. But no words came out. What could he say? Anything he offered now would sound weak. Hollow. Too late. Maya, on the other hand, didn't linger. She didn't gloat. She didn't roll her eyes or smirk or walk away like she'd won some kind of battle. Because to her, this wasn't about proving a point, it was just a moment. A moment where she chose to let her truth speak louder than anyone else's assumptions. She simply turned, picked up her mop again, and walked back toward the hallway, her posture still straight, her pace still calm. To most she looked the same as before. But to everyone who had witnessed what just happened, Maya had transformed into something else entirely. Not the janitor. Not the cleaning lady. But the most intelligent, composed, and powerful person in the room. And as she disappeared around the corner, a strange quiet settled over the set, one that had nothing to do with filming. It was the quiet that follows truth. The kind that leaves people thinking for a long, long time. After the shock wore off, Dalton tried to save face. The room was still humming with the energy of what had just happened. Maya's incredible multilingual performance had left everyone stunned, and all eyes were still on her. But Dalton, feeling the shift in the room and the cracks forming in his once untouchable image, cleared his throat and forced a weak chuckle. Well, he said, trying to sound amused, anyone can memorize a paragraph. The words hung in the air like a balloon losing air. No one laughed. No one nodded. The silence that followed wasn't the impressed kind. It was the kind that comes when people are embarrassed for you. Dalton's attempt to regain control only made things worse. He couldn't admit he was wrong outright, so he tried to downplay Maya's performance. But that excuse that she had somehow memorized a random French document, then recited it in 3 different languages just for show, fell flat the moment he said it. No one believed it. Not after what they had just seen and heard. And then, something happened that made Dalton's weak defense fall apart entirely. One of the producers on set, a Frenchwoman named Camille, stepped forward. She had been quietly watching the whole situation unfold with a deepening frown. She looked at Maya and asked her a question, entirely in French. Not something from the paper. Not something rehearsed. A natural, unrehearsed question. Without missing a beat, Maya responded. Her accent was smooth and native-like. Her tone confident. And more importantly, she wasn't just giving a basic reply. She engaged in a full conversation. She asked questions back. She clarified points. She even made a small joke, which Camille laughed at genuinely. The exchange lasted maybe a minute, but that was all it took. That's when the crew started to clap again. This time louder. Longer. It wasn't just admiration, it was respect. People were smiling, nodding, even cheering quietly under their breath. The applause wasn't about what Maya had said. It was about who she had shown herself to be. And it left Dalton with nowhere to hide. The man who had strutted into the factory with his designer shoes and puffed-up ego now looked small. He ran a hand through his hair and looked around the room like he was hoping anyone would come to his defense. But no one did. Not even the assistant who usually followed him like a shadow. Everyone was too busy watching Maya. Dalton's shoulders sank slightly. He took a deep breath, then another. His gaze dropped to the floor for a second before he finally began walking toward her. The same man who had moments earlier spoken down to her, like she didn't belong, now approached her with hesitation. He stopped a few feet in front of her, swallowed hard, and said something no one expected to hear from a man like him. "I owe you an apology." The room grew quiet again, not from tension but from surprise. "I judged you without knowing anything about you," he continued, his voice lower now, stripped of its usual arrogance. "That was wrong." Maya looked at him calmly. Her expression didn't change. She didn't gloat. She didn't make a sarcastic comment. She simply gave a polite nod, the kind that says, "I hear you, but I didn't need this." Because she didn't. She hadn't needed his apology, his validation, or his approval. Her skills had already spoken. Her intelligence had already filled the room, reshaping how everyone saw her, including him. And while his words might have made him feel better, Maya knew the truth. Real respect isn't something you ask for. It's something you earn. And she had earned it without ever raising her voice. Dalton lingered for a moment longer, unsure what to do next. Then he turned and walked back toward the monitors, quieter now, less sure of himself. The same man who had once believed himself the smartest in the room had just learned one of the most important lessons of his career. And it hadn't come from a producer, a film critic, or a Hollywood executive. It had come from a woman with a mop in one hand and brilliance in her mind. Maya, meanwhile, went back to work. She didn't talk about what had happened. She didn't bring it up with the crew or replay the moment over and over. That wasn't her style. For her, it wasn't about proving someone wrong. It was about showing up, being herself, and never underestimating her own worth, no matter who else did. But word traveled fast. By the end of the day, everyone on the set knew the story. Crew members were whispering about it in hallways. Someone even posted a vague mention of it on social media, without names, and it quickly gained traction. Not because it was scandalous but because it was inspiring. In a world that often judges people by appearances, Maya had reminded everyone of something powerful. Talent doesn't come with a title. Intelligence doesn't come with a salary. And dignity? That comes from within. And while Maya might still have been wearing that janitor's uniform, no one would ever look at her the same way again. A few weeks later, something unexpected happened. Maya was finishing her shift one evening, just like she always did. Quietly, efficiently, without calling attention to herself. The memory of what had happened with Dalton had faded somewhat from the factory floor. People still gave her subtle nods of respect, still looked at her differently, but no one brought it up directly anymore. Maya appreciated that. She wasn't in it for attention. She had done what she always did. Let her work speak for itself. But this time her work had spoken a little louder than usual. That same producer who had watched the scene unfold, Camille, the one who had spoken to her in French and been so impressed by her fluency, had kept Maya in the back of her mind. Camille had worked in the industry long enough to know how rare it was to find someone with Maya's poise and intellect. And even rarer to find someone who was both brilliant and humble. So one day, Camille picked up the phone and made a call. The next morning, Maya received an email that nearly made her drop her phone. Camille was offering her a consulting role on an upcoming international film project. It wasn't just some background task either. Maya would be responsible for coaching actors in French, Spanish, and Swahili, reviewing scripts for cultural accuracy, and assisting with the linguistic authenticity of the film. It was the kind of job Maya had once dreamed about, back when she was staying up late at night writing essays and flashcards after long shifts. And now it was real. The pay was more than anything she had ever earned scrubbing floors or emptying bins. More than that, though, it was a chance to do what she loved and be respected for it. Camille told her, "I don't care about your title. I care about what you bring to the table. And you, Maya, bring a lot." Maya accepted the offer with grace. Not with wide-eyed shock or frantic excitement, but with quiet pride. She knew her worth. She had always known it. The world was just starting to catch up. As for Dalton, He never quite recovered from what had happened on set. His career didn't crash and burn, but the shine on his reputation definitely dulled. People whispered about that moment behind closed doors, the way he'd mock someone he assumed was beneath him, only to be publicly and profoundly proven wrong. It wasn't just the crew that remembered. The moment went viral online. A sound technician had written a vague post the day after it happened. It didn't mention names, but it painted the picture clearly. A powerful man tried to belittle a janitor, only for her to outshine him in 3 languages. Someone else picked up the story, then another. Soon it was being reshared thousands of times, picked up by small media outlets, even discussed on a few talk shows. People online praised Maya's grace, her quiet strength, her intellect. She became a kind of symbol of dignity, of hidden brilliance, of what happens when you underestimate the wrong person. They didn't need to know her full name. They just called her the janitor who spoke 3 languages. Comments poured in from people around the world. Proof that intelligence doesn't wear a suit. She didn't clap back, she educated. This is why you treat everyone with respect. Dalton, for his part, tried to lay low. His publicist released a generic statement about learning from past mistakes, but the damage was done. His name, once associated with elite filmmaking, was now shadowed by the lesson he had learned the hard way. He knew it, and so did everyone else. But Maya didn't engage. She didn't comment on the post. She didn't repost the clips or give an interview. She stayed quiet. She didn't need to prove anything more. Her actions had already said everything that needed to be said. Instead, she focused on her new job. She traveled with the film team to different locations, helped actors nail their lines in French, guided the crew on how to authentically represent different cultures, and earned praise not just for her knowledge, but for her attitude. She was calm, kind, professional. She listened more than she spoke. And when she did speak, people listened. Some crew members on the new set knew who she was. They whispered about her with admiration, but she never brought it up. She wasn't interested in being famous for one viral moment. She wanted to build something that lasted. Back at the factory, her former coworkers followed her story from afar. Some were inspired to return to school. Some just smiled when they thought of her. They all remembered the day Maya changed the room with her words. In the end, Maya proved something powerful. Not with anger or revenge. Not with fame or flash. But with consistency, humility, and excellence. She proved that dignity doesn't shout. It speaks softly in French, in Spanish, in Swahili. And sometimes, the smartest person in the room is the one you least expect. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful true stories just like this one. Hit that bell icon so you never miss a moment of motivation. Thanks for watching.